I'm Giselle. Welcome to Westby. Hey Westby women, get ready for an unforgettable getaway. We're inviting you to an overnight retreat at the beautiful Day Spring in Ellington on November 8th to 9th. This retreat is all about fellowship, personal time with God, and of course, lots of fun. Trust us, this is an experience you don't want to miss. To join the adventure, just scan the QR code at the welcome desk to register. But don't snooze on this, registration closes on October 7th, so grab your spot today. Looking to connect? Join a life group. Groups meet on campus at 9:30 and 11 a.m. on Sundays, at 6:15 p.m. on Wednesdays, and at various times throughout the week. For more info, swing by the welcome desk or head over to groups.westby.org. Let's get connected and grow together. Have you discovered your spot to serve at Treat Street? Our church-wide neighborhood outreach needs you. There are so many ways to get involved. You can host a trunk, volunteer to supervise an inflatable for an hour, or drop off individually wrapped candy in our Treat Street candy collection bins. Head over to treatstreet.westby.org to sign up and be a part of the fun. That's it for now. Let's worship together.
Then the Pharisees met together to plot how to trap Jesus into saying something for which he could be arrested. They sent some of their disciples, along with the supporters of Herod, to meet with him. "Teacher," they said, "we know how honest you are. You teach the way of God truthfully. You are impartial, and don't play favorites. Now tell us what you think about this. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Jesus knew their evil motives. "You hypocrites," he said. "Why are you trying to trap me? Here, show me the coin used for the tax." When they handed him a Roman coin, he asked, "Whose picture and title are stamped on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. "Well then," he said, "give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God." His reply amazed them, and they went away. That same day, Jesus was approached by some Sadducees, religious leaders who say there is no resurrection from the dead. They posed this question: "Teacher, Moses said if a man dies without children, his brother should marry the widow and have a child who will carry on the brother's name. Well, suppose there were 7 brothers. The oldest one married and then died without children. So his brother married the widow, but the second brother also died, and the third brother married her. This continued with all 7 of them. Last of all, the woman also died. So tell us, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? For all 7 were married to her." Jesus replied, "Your mistake is that you don't know the Scriptures, and you don't know the power of God. For when the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. In this respect, they will be like the angels in heaven. But now, as to whether there will be a resurrection of the dead, haven't you ever read about this in the Scriptures? Long after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had died, God said, 'I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.' So he is the God of the living, not the dead." When the crowds heard him, they were astounded at his teaching. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question: "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments." Then, surrounded by the Pharisees, Jesus asked them a question: "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They replied, "He is the son of David." Jesus responded, "Then why does David, speaking under the inspiration of the Spirit, call the Messiah my Lord? For David said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit in the place of honor at my right hand until I humble your enemies beneath your feet.' Since David called the Messiah my Lord, how can the Messiah be his son?" No one could answer him, and after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions.
A gotcha question is one that takes a fact or a known occurrence, but then frames it with presuppositions that may or may not be true. You know what a gotcha question is. Let me give you an example. Why were you unfair when you yelled at that person? Well, the fact, yelling, is framed with a presupposition, unfairness. It could be that the yelling was unfair, or maybe there are good reasons to yell at someone. The crosswalk sign changed and they were about to step into ongoing traffic. I mean, there's plenty of reasons that could be valid for yelling at someone. I mean, they might be a Yankees fan. They might deserve to be yelled at. So a gotcha question is meant to trap someone in an answer that will cause them to be discredited or embarrassed. And the motive of such questions is typically to malign someone's character or hurt their reputation. Most people who study this, they date the history of gotcha questions to political journalists in the 1980s. It seems to have taken off since then. But I think gotcha questions go back a lot further. In fact, there are some in the Bible. And that's the text we're going to be in today. Matthew 22. There are two groups that are trying to trap Jesus with gotcha questions, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So let me give you a little backstory here before we look at the details of Matthew 22. The Pharisees and the Sadducees comprised the two major ruling classes in Jewish society during the time of Christ. And both of these groups opposed Jesus. Now, the Pharisees and the Sadducees formed during the 400-year intertestamental period, that time between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's about 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. And both had seats on the Sanhedrin, or the Sanhedrin, depending on how you pronounce it, which was the highest religious and civil tribunal. So it was the governing body, and it comprised of 70 members. Now, who exactly are the Sadducees? Who exactly are the Pharisees? The Sadducees are more aristocratic. They're wealthy. They created a political alliance with Rome. They also denied the supernatural. So this would include the resurrection, which is why we get a question from them about the resurrection in this text. But they did still hold to Moses' law, the first 5 books of the Bible. They just didn't believe in anything supernatural. Now, the Pharisees also held power, but they're a different group. They're not aristocrats. They're the commoners. And they held the respect of the ordinary people. It's the Pharisees who created the synagogue system. They tended to stay out of politics as separatists, and they focused more on building rigid religious systems. They're often tied to legalism, which we'll get in next week. So hold that thought. And the Pharisees believed strongly in the unseen and the supernatural miracles. So you might say, wow, okay, both groups held power, but they seem very different. I mean, this is almost like Republicans and Democrats, and in a way it is. They're both in positions of power, but they're both very different. The Sadducees held more seats on the Sanhedrin, and they also held the positions of chief priest and high priest. So they tended to have a little more power, but because the Pharisees had the ear of the commoner, they also had a lot of sway. And there was some tension between these two groups, as you can imagine. They have some very different views. The Pharisees had the respect of the people, but the Sadducees had all the political power. The Pharisees wanted separation from Rome. The Sadducees wanted connection. The Pharisees represented the ordinary people. The Sadducees were elitist. And this is why, if you go to the text, Matthew 22, verse 34, the Pharisees are amused that Jesus silenced the Sadducees. I mean, these two groups, they don't like each other. But they ultimately came together to conspire to kill Jesus. They both try some gotcha questions here in Matthew 22. So the Pharisees try a gotcha question about taxes. Now understand, they want separation from Rome. So that's an appropriate question about taxes. The Sadducees try a gotcha question about the resurrection. That's what happens next. They don't believe in the resurrection, so of course they're going to ask that. And then the Pharisees try another gotcha question about the law, and they want their particular interpretation of the law. So there's this back and forth here. And then in verse 41, Jesus is surrounded by the Pharisees, and he springs a question on them. So let's dive into all this. Let's look at taxes and resurrection and law and some different things that are going on here. And we'll begin with the first part, which is this question that comes from the Pharisees about taxes. So with this question about taxes, what Jesus is basically saying here is let Caesar have his coins, but God desires all of you. And this is a bit of a tricky text here. We're looking specifically at verses 15 through 22. It's more than what appears to be on the surface. It's more than just give your taxes to the government and give your tithe to God. I mean, that's true, but there's more going on here. This is really about your point of origin and what makes you who you really are. It's about what image you reflect. Are you reflecting a man-made image or one that is God-made? And we're all made in the image of God, so we should be reflecting him. So in verse 15, this group of the religious elite, they come together. Let's get Jesus to say something against Roman law. So they want to arrest him. They want Rome to arrest him. And they're thinking, if Rome arrests him, we don't have to. And verse 17 presents this trap question. And again, there's much more here than just church and state issues with taxes. If that was all that it was, the Pharisees wouldn't have been amazed at his answer, as it says in verse 22. So there's a deeper issue here. And here's the heart of the issue. It's injustice. The Jewish people at the time were taxed heavily, and the tax was a sign of oppression. Many of them were living in poverty and having to pay these taxes. So this question would have been felt by everyone. Remember, the Pharisees want separation from Rome. So, of course, they're like, why should the people feel this oppression? So the religious leaders here are saying, let's fight for justice, which is the right mission, but they were using it in a way to trick Jesus. Right mission, wrong heart. Now, here's Jesus's dilemma. If he says, don't pay the tax, God is the ruler, the law of Moses forbids it, then he could have been accused of treason by the Roman government, could have been arrested. But if he says, pay the tax, then he's basically telling the group of people that are there, well, the man is ruler, not God. Then he might incite crowds around him. It would be tantamount to Jesus saying injustice should be tolerated and the people should remain in poverty. This is a deep question here. We see that the coin had a face on it, and some of our coins have faces on them. Well, you would do this as a ruler. You would put your face or your image on a coin because it's a good way for people to know who you are. They don't have pictures. They don't have internet. They don't have ways of showing who you are. And, you could create a statue, but a statue can be torn down. You can have a portrait made, but a portrait can be burned or destroyed. The best way to get your symbol, your image out there was to put it on the one thing that people won't throw away or destroy: money. So these rulers put their images on a coin. Now, what was exactly on this coin? There was this inscription. It said, Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. Augustus claimed divinity. So Tiberius, his son, was claiming to be the Son of God. Irony here is rich, of course. The true Son of God holding up the symbol of a false Son of God. Now, this image would have been blasphemy to the Jews. This claim of deity from a ruler would have been thrust in their face on a daily basis as they bought and sold goods. And so Jesus knew this question moved beyond taxes. Whose image do we really reflect? Do we reflect the image of God, or do we reflect the image of humanity? Are people supreme, or is God supreme? So coins have an image on them, and they can be returned to the government that issued them. but humanity is made in the image of God. All of humanity belongs to God. So there's no conflict of duty or authority here. You can live under a government and also worship Christ. So Jesus says here, back to the main point, let Caesar have his coins. That his image is on them. Let him have his coins. You need to give all of who you are, your whole heart, to God. Plenty of governments have stolen away religious freedoms, but no one can take your faith. You'll always be free to give everything to Jesus. Now, the Sadducees are next. So the Pharisees kind of had their turn. Now it's the Sadducees, and they present this rather silly question about the afterlife. And so we move from taxes, the issue of taxes, to the issue of resurrection. And what we learn here is that God desires for everyone to move from death to life. Notice what it says in verse 32, and notice the tense of the verb. It says, I am, not I was. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. You know, the bodies of the patriarchs are buried, but what Jesus is saying is that they're alive today. I am their God. You know, God desires life. He's the God of the living, it says. He's not the God of death. He's the God of life, and he wants life for you. So these followers of God's way are with him now. The Sadducees here bring this question about brothers marrying a widow. It's all derived from Old Testament law. Specifically, you can look it up, Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. There's a lot there, but in essence, and let me just kind of summarize this because it's a very deep subject, but in essence, a childless widow is to be cared for in marriage by her husband's brother. This is a compassionate law. It was meant to care for people who would otherwise not be cared for, particularly widows. So this was, this is all about land and family and inheritance, and all of that's tied together in Old Testament society. And the point of this Old Testament law was to provide a son to the childless widows to fight off what would have been otherwise unavoidable poverty that would come their way because that they didn't have a husband anymore. So this is all about compassion. It's not about what the Sadducees are trying to make it out to be. And so Jesus says that there will be no new physical births in heaven and no new marriages in heaven, which is why, back to the main point, everyone needs to be born again. Everyone needs to know Jesus today. So, but obviously, this brings up a question. It's kind of difficult to look at this text and study this text and not answer this question. I mean, I get it asked a lot as a pastor. Will I be married to my earthly spouse in heaven? And frankly, the Bible is silent on the issue. I wish I could say, here's the answer. But the Bible's silent. We don't know. But here's the bottom line. Here's what we do know. We will not be deprived of any meaningful relationships with believing friends and family members when we go to heaven. Will you know your spouse? Yes. Will you be married in heaven? We don't know. But you certainly will know people, and you won't be deprived of any relationship while you're in heaven. So Jesus flips this on its side and discusses really what's most important around this issue of resurrection, which the Sadducees didn't even believe anyway. Now we get another question about law. And what we learn here is that your own efforts, are not enough for healing. You need Jesus. So here's the gotcha question. What's the most important commandment? Implying, this question from the Pharisees, implying that there is some sort of hierarchy to God's law. And Jesus, in essence, answers, well, all of the laws are the most important. And we get the great commandment here. Love God with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. So this is a summary of the 10 Commandments. And this is, you may wonder, why does Jesus summarize the law in this way? And it's very simple, actually. So love God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So the first set of 10 commandments, the first 3 of the 10 commandments deal with our relationship with God. That's loving God with everything you have. The next set of the 10 commandments deal with our relationship with others. We also have a commandment in the middle of about the Sabbath. So this is this transitional command between God and others. But very simply, first 3 commandments of the 10 commandments are all about God. The last 6 are all about our relationship with others. Love God, love others. Jesus is just summarizing everything. He's just taking the 10 commandments and summarizing them. And then what do the 10 commandments summarize? The 10 commandments summarize all of the law. So that's why he says in verse 40, the entire law depends on these 2 commandments. He's just saying, let me summarize this for you. So he's saying everything's important. It's a brilliant answer. Now, you also have to understand what the law is. And we've mentioned this many times if you've been following these videos. The law is like an x-ray. So why do we have the Old Testament? Why do we have the Pentateuch? Why do we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? Why is there so much stuff in here, and why is it some of it hard to read? Well, the point of the law was to reveal your brokenness. In the same way that an x-ray reveals what's broken, you have a broken bone, an x-ray can show you where it's broken. So the law reveals where we are broken. But the x-ray can't heal. The law can't heal. It helps with the diagnosis to show you the problem, but you need a remedy. Same with our sin. So the law reveals our brokenness through sin. But the law itself is powerless to save. Paul writes about this in Romans 8. Let me read you just a couple verses here from Romans 8, verses 3 and 4. So here's what Paul writes in his letter to the Romans. The law of Moses was unable to save us because of the weakness of our sinful nature. So God did what the law could not do. He sent his own son in a body like the bodies we sinners have. And in that body, God declared an end to sin's control over us by giving his son as a sacrifice for our sins. He did this so that the just requirement of the law would be fully satisfied for us, who no longer follow our sinful nature, but instead follow the Spirit. So the law itself is powerless. It reveals what's wrong, but we need Jesus in order to be saved. So now, back to Matthew 22, the text concludes with Jesus asking his own gotcha question. And he reveals that he is Lord and that only the Messiah can save you. All these gotcha questions connect at this point. What seemed like a scattered attack from the Pharisees and the Sadducees is actually painting a picture of the gospel here. If the Messiah is David's son, looking again here at the very end of this passage, verse 41 through 46, if the Messiah is David's son, then why does David call him Lord? So that's the gotcha question. All right, Messiah is in the line of David, David's son. Why does David call him Lord? And Jesus actually quotes from Psalm 110. And we get this quote, the Lord said to my Lord. The Lord, specifically Yahweh here, says to my Adonai, Lord. Now, who is David calling Lord here? And I mean, you may be thinking, man, this is really tricky. And it is. I mean, Jesus is kind of pushing back on them with another trick question. So the big picture, who is David calling Lord here? David is the king. Who can be his Lord? The Messiah is more than a human king. The Messiah is God on earth. So Jesus is asking a question here. How can David call his son Lord? If David calls his natural descendant Lord, then whoever it must be is greater than David. It is. It's the son. He would be the son of David and also the Son of God. Now, how can David refer to the Messiah as both Son and Lord? No father would call his son Lord. Jesus is David's son. He's in his line. He's a descendant, and he's also David's Lord. He's David's God. The Messiah is more than David's son. The Messiah is also David's king. And this is where Jesus is saying, it's me. I am the King of Kings. I am David's Lord. Yes, I fulfill prophecy. I'm in his line. The Lord said to my Lord, I'm in his line. But I'm also reigning over all. What Jesus is saying here, and I realize this is all very tricky, but what Jesus is saying is, I'm not just the political leader here to set you free from Roman oppression. I'm the Lord you need to be saved eternally. In the timeline of human history, Jesus Christ literally stands out. There's history before him and history after him. You can say BC and AD or BCE and CE. It doesn't matter. Whatever terminology you use, what's there in the middle of it all? It's the cross. The cross is the feature of all of human history. And the cross, all of human history leads up to the cross. All of human history after the cross looks back upon it. So what is it about this man? This homeless carpenter from a small do-nothing town. What is it about him that changed the world? How is it his first followers, Jews, people who wouldn't even speak the name of God, wouldn't even write the name of God, a society that would never call a man God? How is it that they saw Jesus as God and worshiped him as king? Perhaps God really did send Jesus to save the world. I love how it ends, verse 46. No one dared ask him any more questions. Why? Because they were scared of the answers. But not you. You don't have to be scared of the answers. Why? Because there's no reason to fear the one who saves you.